Hello, and welcome to this first lesson in this module on how to use LinkedIn effectively. We're going to start off here by just going over why LinkedIn and social media in general matter so much and why you need to take them into account and use them properly when you are looking for internships or full-time jobs. The main reason why LinkedIn and more broadly social media matters is just like email. If you think about the time and effort required to implement fixes to LinkedIn and set up a proper profile, it doesn't really take that long. You're looking at something that maybe takes an hour or 2 hours, maybe up to a few hours, and something that needs to be updated a little bit each year. However, if you look at the actual benefit that you gain from it, it would be somewhere up here. So if you look at this in terms of impact of solution versus implementation of solution, it is easy to implement and it has a high impact on your job search results, meaning that, according to this matrix anyway, it is a major opportunity. If you think about the other quadrants over here, something like studying for the CFA and spending 700 hours on that would be in the hard implementation of solution category. The impact might be high, but it takes a lot of effort to get there. And even something like preparing for interviews or taking classes or getting additional internships would probably all fall into the hard category in terms of implementation of solution. They may have a high impact, but they take a lot more time to implement than these LinkedIn fixes. So that's the first reason why it matters so much. But there's another reason why it matters, which is that real life and online life are converging. What I mean by this is that if you do something stupid online or something that other people, such as recruiters, perceive as stupid, you could easily get rejected from interviews. You could suddenly get no results in your networking efforts if enough people hear about it. I have seen cases where bankers are screening candidates in rooms and they see something on someone's resume or they heard something about someone, they go look up the person very quickly and they see embarrassing search results and the person then does not get an interview. So you need to be very conscious of this. If you are of a certain age, let's say you've been out of school for 10 years or 15 years or something like that, you probably have some awareness of this. This message is really intended for you if you are an undergraduate or recent graduate and you don't yet have much real-world experience. People are definitely going to judge you based on what they can find about you online. And social media accounts, of course, are one of the primary ways to find out about you online. One of the most famous mishaps ever was from this guy, Alexei Vayner. He created a video called Impossible is Nothing. This is a long time ago, over 10 years ago at this point. He submitted it to banks along with his resume and application, and he basically got blacklisted everywhere. People forwarded the video widely, and he could never actually interview at a large bank because so many people knew his name just from that stupid video. So be very, very careful. This is an extreme example. You are probably never going to do anything this dumb, but the principle remains. If you do something silly online, that will affect your real life chances of success as well. Recruiters are definitely going to Google your name. They're going to look for anything negative or even anything potentially negative they can find. Here's an example. Let's say that we search for this person's name. You can see that some of the search results here are for Facebook first and then some YouTube search results. Now, nothing here is really controversial or seemingly negative, but here's the problem. If we go in and we click on one of these Facebook profiles, let's say that we find that he's posted pictures of himself drinking with others, or posting embarrassing messages, or someone else has posted embarrassing messages on his profile, or something like that. Recruiters can interpret that very negatively and then actually decide not to interview you solely based on that. Similarly with YouTube, if you post controversial videos, or let's say you have your viewing history enabled and someone goes in there and sees that you've been watching cat videos or something else that they think is ridiculous, and it could just be their opinion, it doesn't really matter. They could then judge you based on that and then decide not to give you an interview based on something very, very silly like that. Now, bankers and recruiters will deny that this happens, but the truth is it does, and I've seen it firsthand. So I'm not trying to scare you, but I am trying to make you aware that this does factor in and you need to think about your online presence when you apply for jobs. And of course, the flip side of all this is that good social media profiles, like what we're going to cover in this lesson, can actually help you out a lot and improve your chances of success. So your goal by the time you get to the end of this module and this set of lessons will be to make your LinkedIn profile the hub of your online identity, and then to hide your other channels or make them private, or at least avoid posting anything that is controversial or that could harm your chances of getting a job or an internship. The reason why LinkedIn should be the hub is because it's the top professional social network. Recruiters use it all the time. You're going to use it all the time when networking. And it should really be the first search result for your name if you have a relatively less common name anyway. So that should be your goal. And anything else, you don't necessarily need to delete your Instagram account or your Twitter account or your Pinterest account or anything like that. But you don't want to have anything controversial on there. And if you do, you really need to hide it or make it private or make it so you cannot be personally traced to that account. So here's the plan for this module. First off, in this lesson, we're going to cover how to set up an effective LinkedIn profile. Then the next lesson, we're going to cover how to search for professionals on LinkedIn, find their contact information. And in many cases, as you'll see, it actually makes more sense to go outside of LinkedIn to contact them. You can find people on LinkedIn, and that's a good approach in a lot of cases, but oftentimes it makes more sense to actually email them or call them and find their contact information via other methods. And then last, we're going to cover how to send messages via LinkedIn and follow up effectively. In a lot of cases, people are just not that responsive over LinkedIn. It's a good way to find people, but not necessarily a good way to contact them. With that said, though, sometimes you will get good results. Sometimes people are more active, and so it's not a complete lost cause, and we do want to cover what to do if you decide to contact people via LinkedIn. Now, in this lesson specifically, we're going to focus on how to set up your LinkedIn profile and how to manage the rest of your social media accounts. So step one in this process will be to clean up your existing social media presence to make sure anything controversial is hidden. Step two will be to gather the ingredients that you need for your new LinkedIn profile. This isn't too complicated, but there are a couple of considerations which, again, I found that undergraduate students tend to be particularly bad at, and sometimes I've just seen a complete lack of common sense applied here. So we're going to cover that and show you some examples of what to do and what not to do in this step. Then in step three, we'll show you how to update your profile, examples of what you should insert for your headline, your URL, your summary, your work experience, and then other sections of your profile. And then in step four, we'll say a little bit about how to add connections and join groups to boost the social proof and the credibility of your profile. One other word of caution before we begin, which is that the LinkedIn user interface changes from time to time, and they will change around things like where tabs are, where settings are, how you search for people, but the core functionality really remains the same. It's not as if they're suddenly changing it and turning it into Twitter or Pinterest. It's still a professional social network, but the interface and the user experience do change from time to time. Sometimes we get angry messages from people wondering, well, this is out of date, this is from a few years ago, why haven't you updated it? And the honest truth is that we cannot go back and completely redo all the videos just for minor UI changes. So if the interface changes and you can't find something, just leave a comment here below the video and ask about it, or email us directly or contact us however you want, but we're happy to answer any questions if something changes and you cannot find where to do something in the new interface that they have. So let's go through step one first, the cleanup of your existing social media profile. First off, with Facebook, you really want to hide your profile from search engines. You want to disallow followers and then ensure that only friends of friends can find you. Here are the settings for my profile. This is probably a little bit hard to read, but I've made it so only friends of friends can look me up. I've made it so search engines cannot index my profile or find it. And then I've made it so even to look me up, you have to be a friend of a friend. Who can see your future posts? I set this to custom because what I've done here is I've hidden this from anyone that I've gotten to know through work or professionally or in some other contexts like that. And if they're actual friends from university or from clubs or activities or something like that, they can see more of what I post. This is probably a little bit paranoid on my part, but I would rather be safe than sorry. But at a bare minimum, you definitely want to set this one at the bottom. to not allow search engines to link to your timeline or index anything that you write there. Now, in terms of other steps to take here, we strongly recommend hiding all your other social media profiles or at least remaining safely anonymous. So if you have an Instagram account, for example, you don't necessarily need to delete it, but you do need to make sure that you're not using your real name there and that whatever username you have cannot easily be linked back to you in any way. Also make sure that any pictures you post are not easily traceable back to you. So you don't want to post a photo of your name or something that can be linked to your name in some way. And the same goes for anything else where sharing photos is very common. One way to think about this is that in terms of risk or reward, the potential upside here is really nothing because these types of accounts are not really going to benefit you in any way, but the potential downside for posting something stupid or controversial or offensive is huge. So it's a case where there's no way that you can really benefit in your job search from any of this, and where you could potentially lose a huge amount if you do the wrong thing. So be very, very careful with what you post here, because I've definitely seen people get in trouble for doing this before. If you really want to, you could just set everything to private and you could maintain your account and then share it with only certain people. I've pasted in some screenshots here. This is the Instagram interface on the left-hand side and how to set up a private account. And then on the right-hand side, this is the Pinterest interface, at least at one point in time. And this shows you how to create a secret board there so that only certain people can see it. You could do this. Personally speaking, I find it a little cumbersome to keep track of so many different lists and who has access to what, and so on and so forth. But if you really want to express yourself and you absolutely have to keep these accounts, then this is one option. We get a lot of questions, especially from students, on whether or not they should start a blog or other website and start writing about finance and if that will improve their chances. I would say in general, if you can keep it completely on topic and appropriate and make it non-controversial, then sure, you can do it. The truth is it's probably not going to help you that much at a large bank, but it may make a bigger difference at smaller firms, especially if they have more time to do background research on you and they come across it. In general, though, with this type of thing, a better and smarter approach might be to submit your articles to a site like Seeking Alpha if you want to write about stock pitches or investment ideas, for example. They're a credible site, and then you seem even more credible because you're published there as opposed to on your own site. So if you really feel the need to share finance ideas and investment ideas with the world at large, it may be a much smarter idea to submit them to an existing site like that, and then to be able to point to that as evidence of what you've learned on your own or what value you can bring to the firm. So that's really it for step one, cleaning up your existing social media presence. Now we're going to move into step two and show you what to gather for your new LinkedIn profile and what ingredients you need first. This is actually fairly simple because you just need two ingredients: a high quality headshot. Ideally, this will be professionally done if it's possible to do so and it's within your financial means. If you're a student, no, it's probably not worth spending $500 to get a headshot because it doesn't really make that big of a difference. It does help somewhat, but I don't think it's worth quite that much in your job search. And if you follow the guidelines here, you can easily get a high quality headshot on your own. And then the second ingredient is the most recent version of your resume or CV. You can use one of our templates. Just do a Google search for investment banking resume or go to mergers and acquisitions and search for resume, and you can get all of our templates there. So the resume part of this should be pretty straightforward if you follow our templates. We've had so many articles on resumes that I'm not really going to cover them here. Just look at what's on the site and follow the examples there. Look in the comment threads if you want more guidance on what to do. For headshot though, there are a couple basic requirements that, again, I've seen a lot of students ignore. I've seen people post really silly photos or non-professional photos. So here are the requirements for your headshot. First off, you should be wearing business professional attire. If you're male, this really means a suit and a tie. You don't necessarily need a tie. You could just get away with wearing a jacket and a dress shirt, so that's an option as well. But ideally, you will be wearing business professional attire. You have to look directly at the camera. So this is not a fashion shoot. You're not in a fashion magazine where you're looking off into the distance or looking sideways or staring at someone else. You need to be looking directly at the camera so people can tell what you look like. You should ideally be up against a solid background. Now, you can have somewhat of a colored background where the shades vary a little bit. We'll look at some examples of that, but you don't want to be standing in front of the forest. You don't want to be standing in front of a circus clown who's juggling or anything ridiculous like that. So you want to have as close to a solid background as you can possibly achieve. And then the photo itself should really only show your head or the top part of your body. It shouldn't show your entire body because it's too hard to see your face if you do it like that. So be very, very careful of this. I've seen this mistake ruin some otherwise really good profiles. If recruiters and other people can't really see what you look like, you're going to get a much, much lower response rate. Let's go through a few fun examples of bad headshots so you can see what to avoid. So here's the first example. This person is standing in front of a forest or some type of green area, already not a good sign. She's not wearing business professional attire, another bad sign. She is looking at the camera and it does show only the top part of her body, so that's okay. But in general, this is something that would belong on maybe Facebook, but not on LinkedIn. Here's another example of a bad headshot photo. Yes, he's wearing business professional attire, but it shows his whole body. You shouldn't really be posing like this. So having his hands in his pocket like this is not recommended. You shouldn't be doing that. You should have it so it only really shows the top part of your body and so that the position of your hands and arms is irrelevant. This one, I don't think I need to go over at all. Let's just say that you really don't want to have casual clothing on at all when you have this picture. You really need to have at least a jacket and a dress shirt on so it looks better. Pajamas, anything casual, photos of you playing sports, anything like that is all completely off limits for LinkedIn. And then this last one, technically, if she were actually facing the camera, this one might actually be okay, but she's not. She's looking sideways, looking away. So this is also a really bad example of a headshot photo. Now let's look at some good examples of headshot photos. So here's one where even though the background is not solid exactly, it doesn't really make it harder to see the person. So this one is completely fine. Wearing business professional attire, looking at the camera, only shows the top part of her body. Same for this next one. And then I'll show a few more photos here, but you get the idea from looking at all these. In each case, the person is wearing business professional attire or something very close to it. He or she is looking directly at the camera. The background is relatively solid or at least easy to see the person on, and everything else follows our guidelines as well. So these are some good examples of headshot photos. These are all professionally taken, but yours doesn't have to be. You can just go up against a white wall or a light colored wall in your apartment or dorm room or house or wherever you are and get someone else to take the photo. Yes, a professional makes a difference and it'll be slightly better, but again, if you're a student, you don't necessarily need to do it. You just need something that makes it relatively easy to see who you are. So that's really all you need for your new LinkedIn profile. The biggest point there, again, is get a good headshot. It really does make a big difference. Let's move into step 3 now, which will be the most detailed part of this tutorial on how to update your profile, how to insert your photo, set up your headline, your URL, summary experience, and insert other information. So the first thing that you should actually do here, I call it step 3.1, is to hide yourself. What I mean is that if you go in and start updating your profile, other people in your network, anyone you've added on LinkedIn, will actually see your changes and they'll be notified each time you do it. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it creates some risk for you because if your boss sees it, or a former coworker, or anyone else, usually when people update their LinkedIn profile, it means they're looking for a new job. So if other people see this, they may inadvertently think that you are now looking for a new job, regardless of whether you actually are or not. So I would be very careful with it. If you go to the right-hand side of your profile, this area, notify your network, set this to no so that your network does not see profile changes when you're going in and updating everything here. You really want to be a little more quiet and careful about this, especially if you're making dramatic changes to your profile. So that's the first step. I would also recommend turning off updates and your activity feed if you can do so. It doesn't really make a huge difference because you won't really be that active. You're mostly focused on changing your own profile. But if you want to be extra careful, you can do that for now and then re-enable these once you're done making these changes. Once you've done that, next up, you want to enter your basic information into your profile. So you have to upload your photo, enter your name, and then enter your headline. Now, the photo part should be self-explanatory if you follow the guidelines that we set out for your headshot photo earlier. But with your name and your headline, it sounds easy, but again, it's easy to make some silly mistakes here if you're not careful. First off, for your name, I hope you know how to enter your first name and last name, but one point I would raise here is that you may have a name with multiple spellings, or you may have an English name and then a name in another language. A lot of our students are international and from Asia or Europe or South America or Africa or other places. If you have a situation like that, you want to be careful to include both of those names in your profile so that anyone looking for you can find you and there's no confusion over whether or not you're the right person. So here's a few examples of what I mean. And I've just listed some names here. So in each case, I've listed the person's native name in Chinese or Korean or Arabic, as you can see right here in parentheses, and then I've listed their English name in the beginning. So this just ensures that there's no confusion over who you are or if you're actually the right person. You should also ideally list your name the same way on your resume so they can quickly match it up and tell who you are and match your LinkedIn profile to your resume. But even outside of that, if you have a normal English name and you're from the US or the UK or something like that, it may have multiple spellings or slight variations. One example is William and Bill. If you go by both of those, you should probably put the other one in parentheses or at least note it somewhere in your profile so that, again, anyone looking at it can tell that you are the person that they're looking for. Now, for your headline, you should ideally use your current job title if you're working right now. So if you're an investment associate at a certain firm, you can just use that. If you're an investment banking analyst at a certain bank, you can use that. And if you're currently working, this should be pretty easy. It really is just your current job title. You have to be careful here because some LinkedIn tutorials will say, be creative and express yourself and talk about your deepest desires in your headline and what you really want to bring to the world. In the finance industry, this is a bad idea. You don't really want to express your creativity in your LinkedIn profile. Keep it conservative and use your current job title instead. Now, if you're not working or you're in school right now, you could list the jobs you're seeking in your headline or your previous or current internship experience or your graduation date or some combination of all of those. Here are a few examples of what I've seen used effectively by students or others who are not working at the time. One example here is an MBA 2000XX candidate at University of XX seeking investment banking associate roles. So we have the credibility booster here because someone can tell that it is a university that he or she has probably heard of. At least we know the person is going for an MBA degree, so that boosts their credibility. And then we know what type of role they're going for as well. If you completed an internship recently, or you're doing one right now, you could just list the division name and then say intern at company Y. If you've already graduated or you're going to graduate very soon, you could just list your university name, the year you're going to graduate, and then what type of opportunities you're seeking. And then let's say that you completed an internship in the summer and you're not doing it right now, but you still want to be known by the industry name of your internship. Well, you could easily create a profile and say private equity analyst, University Q 2000XX graduate. So you're indicating what date you'll graduate and what your experience has been. And if someone looks at it, they'll be able to tell that it was just a summer internship. But the point is your headline should match the industries that you've worked in before or what you want to work in the future, and should ideally contain your school name, especially if you're not working or you're a recent graduate. So that's a little bit about how to set your headline. Now, the next step here is to customize your URL. What I mean by this is in your LinkedIn profile, and I'm just using my profile here as an example, right under your photo, you'll be able to click this area that includes what your URL is. Now, by default, this will have maybe your name and maybe a string of numbers or letters after it. It's not really ideal to keep it like that. You ideally want to make it your first name and last name here. Now, I have a very uncommon last name, so for me, it's easy to get first name, last name. If you have a more common name, you may have to insert middle initials or your graduation year or your birth year or some other set of small numbers or periods in between or something else like that. But you want to make it a little bit easier to find, and you don't want to use the default profile URL they give you. So a bad example of this would be Mark Cuban's profile. It does have his name in it, but then it has a string of numbers after it, 5B756A. You don't really want to set it up like that. It's better to make it something like linkedin.com/in/John Smith. That's obviously not available since it's such a common name, but you get the idea. Again, if it's not available, add middle initials, add a middle name, add a name in your native language if you have an English name, and then a name in your own language. Add years, change around the order, be creative, and think of some other way to set this up. You really don't want to add a long string of numbers or letters. For reasons similar to what we covered in the tutorials on emails, it looks unprofessional if you have 501835579 after your name. It almost looks like a spam email address or a spam URL. So be very, very careful about this. We've been through quite a lot so far, so I wanted to take a step back and just show you what your profile should look like at this point. So here's your headshot profile. This one, in my opinion, is actually not that great a profile photo, but it's better than a lot of what I see. At least he's wearing a suit and tie, and it's against a relatively solid background. You can see his name, his title, Investment Banking Associate at Goldman Morgan, and he has his connections here, and his profile URL is set to John B. Smith. Very easy to find, and much better than the default URL they give you. So at this point, this is what your profile should be looking like. Let's move on to the next part and get into your work experience and your summary and other information. So for your summary, again, if you look at a lot of LinkedIn tutorials there for creative professionals or artists or designers, they'll say that you should be creative or post videos of yourself or post interviews of yourself or post 30-second YouTube clips where you introduce yourself or other things like that. In our opinion, this is all a really bad idea for the finance industry. So you don't want to have photos of yourself juggling or dancing with elves or videos of yourself doing anything ridiculous. You want to keep it pretty conservative if you're going for roles in this industry. Here's an example, going back to that same profile that we just looked at before. Senior Investment Banking Associate at Goldman Morgan with experience working on over 16 transactions worth $14 billion total in the electric power, renewable energy, and infrastructure industries. So that's an example of a good summary. And then right below it, he has bullet points for some of his most impressive accomplishments. So if you're working, this should be pretty easy. You can follow something like this and just adapt it to your own work experience. But of course, the question is always, what do you do if you're not currently working full-time? If you're a student, I would mention leadership roles, relevant coursework, previous internships, case competitions, and also the types of roles that you're aiming for right now. And by the way, this also applies if you're a recent graduate, because there it's really the same thing. You're effectively still a student because you haven't been working full-time, although you may have internship experience and experience in some of these other areas. So here's an example. Student at XX University with leadership roles in the investment club and the track team with coursework in accounting and finance and participation in several M&A case competitions, currently seeking investment banking internships. So that would be a good summary if you haven't had full-time work experience yet, but you still want to make something relatively professional looking in your summary area. For the rest of your summary, as I showed you before, you want to use bullet points for maybe 3 to 4 of your most impressive accomplishments. You could talk about early promotions. You could talk about a huge deal that everyone has heard about in the news. You could talk about how you turned around a failing business. You could talk about how you saved a firm money or time. You could talk about how you led a large team or an organization, or how you set up a large on-campus event. Whatever you want to use here is fine, but you have to take a critical look at your resume and figure out what your top 3 or 4 accomplishments really are. Going back to this example from before, we can see that he's really using all of these here because he has a recently announced deal for $4 billion and how he worked directly with the CFO and management team, how he was promoted in only 3 years, how he was the primary associate or analyst on all these deals, and how he led a team of over 20 analysts in his time at this bank. So those are some good examples of points to highlight here. Now, once you have the summary set up, then you have to enter the rest of your work and leadership experience. This should be pretty easy because you're basing it on your resume and you're really just making the entries a little bit shorter. So for example, if you have a list of 7 to 9 bullets in one work experience or internship experience entry, on LinkedIn, you should probably reduce it to 3 to 5 bullets. If you have bullets that go on for 4 or 5 lines because they're so detailed, maybe reduce it down to 2 to 3 lines on LinkedIn for each bullet at the most. So you don't necessarily want to copy and paste it exactly, but what I would probably do is initially copy and paste your resume in, and then tweak it and make everything shorter, a little bit more concise, and focus on the key points when you're using this for LinkedIn purposes. If you are still in school or you're currently unemployed or between jobs, you can still create a work experience entry so that you can list a job title or the positions that you're aiming for right now. So you can still create an entry for what you're currently doing and just say something like seeking investment banking analyst roles or investment banking associate roles or something like that, just so anyone looking at it can get an idea of what you're doing right now. And so it'll be clear that you're not actually working full-time at the moment, but that you're currently looking for opportunities. In terms of formatting for this, if you looked at our resume templates, you know that we recommend a task-centric structure and then a project or client-centric structure depending on the type of experience that you've had. On LinkedIn, they have this feature where you can add individual projects for a work experience entry. So if you can do that, we would recommend listing them below your summary bullets. So here, for example, in the same profile, we have a summary of his experience here with deal work and financial modeling and presentations and memos and other drafting. And then right below that, we have the actual deals that he has advised on here. So if you have deal experience or client or project experience and you can actually do this, we would recommend this setup just so it's easier to scroll through quickly and see what you've actually worked on. If you don't have this and you're just using a task-centric structure, then you don't have to do this. It doesn't really make sense. Just keep it to your summary bullets at the top. So that's your work experience. Now for other information to enter here, just like on your resume, how there's always room at the bottom or sometimes at the top for organizations, certifications, languages, skills and expertise, and education, you can mostly copy these from your resume and just include them in your LinkedIn profile as well. The difference is that you have a lot more room to list your skills here. So we would strongly recommend targeting the keywords that recruiters might be searching for. Keywords like valuation, financial modeling, M&A advisory, leverage buyouts, credit analysis, financial projections, project finance. You get the idea. The fact that you're listing these skills, of course, does not mean that you actually have all of them or that you're an expert in all of these. The point is that you want to show up in search results more readily, and that's why you're adding them to your profile. So here's an example for the profile that we've been using. We have New York Society of Security Analysts, basically the CFA organization for the New York area. We have the organizations that our banker here is a part of, and then we have certifications. And then we have his languages, we have skills and expertise. The other advantage of listing skills and expertise here is that someone can look at these skills in your profile and then endorse you for them or say that you have these skills and upvote you essentially. And so you can get a little more credibility if you have a lot of people saying that, yes, you do indeed have skill in investment management or in sales presentations or in leverage buyouts, for example. And then here's some additional information. He has his interests listed, he has honors and awards. All this is fine, but it's not really the core focus of your profile, so we're going through it relatively quickly. Once you have all that entered, largely from your resume, then you can go in and get recommendations and endorsements and add those to your profile. Recommendations are useful. Endorsements are not quite so useful. With recommendations, ideally you'll get them from senior people. You can just try for one per year or maybe one from each work experience entry you have. You can just send someone a short message and say, "Thanks for adding me on LinkedIn. I was wondering if you could write me a short recommendation for my profile. Here are a few ideas of what you might say," and just give them a few sentences that they can copy and paste. It helps a lot because it shows that you're a real person and that you've really worked with these people before, and they're using their real name to back you up. So it's a lot more credible than if you just had anonymous comments, or as with endorsements, if you just had random people endorsing you for skills that you may or may not actually have. So we would say it is worth spending some time trying to get recommendations. Endorsements, though, tend to be less useful. So here's an example. In this case, we've gotten an endorsement from a VP at Goldman Morgan. It would be better if we can get a recommendation from a managing director or a group head or someone like that, but a VP is fine, and especially if you're at the analyst or intern level, it's good to have a recommendation from someone slightly more senior like this. And you can see you don't need to have a recommendation that goes on for pages. It can just be one or two sentences. This example is very simple, but it is effective because it shows that someone with a real name, with a real position at a real firm is backing you up and saying that you are trustworthy and reliable to work with. Now, once you've done all that, then you can make yourself visible once again. Before you make yourself visible, though, I would recommend letting your profile sit for 1 or 2 days and then doing a quick review one more time, maybe even printing it out and taking a look at it. You'll find errors and mistakes that you did not see the first time around, so it really helps to do this and to let it sit for a few days. Once you've done that and made your edits, you can go back and make your public profile visible to everyone using the settings within LinkedIn. It should be under account or settings or something like that. And your goal by doing this will be to be the #1 search result on Google for your name. Your LinkedIn profile should be the hub of everything. And by doing this and making it visible to search engines and your network and everyone else, by checking this box and saying, "Make my public profile visible to everyone," you are setting yourself up for the chance to be the #1 search result, since the LinkedIn site is so authoritative. So that's it for step 3. Let's move into step 4, adding connections and joining groups. This is going to be fairly simple as well. There isn't too much to say here, but a few points I would make. When you create your LinkedIn profile and you want to use it for networking purposes, once you have it set up, you may be ready to go in and start contacting people and start reaching out. I would recommend adding a few connections first, though. You ideally want to have at least 10 connections before you start doing this. So maybe start adding your friends or classmates of your student, or coworkers, former coworkers, family members, anyone like that that you can think of. If you have only 1 connection or 0 connections, it may be a little bit odd, and someone who's getting messaged by you may not realize that you're actually a real person. So you ideally want to start with at least 10 connections. Then you will hopefully be able to get up to closer to 100 by adding acquaintances and coworkers and former coworkers. LinkedIn has this feature where they can search your email address book and your email account in general and then add people based on that. I would strongly recommend doing that. They will think of people and think of contacts you have that you haven't even thought of in a long time. So I strongly recommend doing that. Your long-term goal should be to have 500 plus connections. If you have over 500, they just show it as 500 plus to get maximum social proof. So you're not going to do this overnight, especially if you're a university student, but in the long term, it really does help to have that. And if you're one of the most viewed profiles on LinkedIn, or a profile that people search for a lot, it'll be easier and easier over time to find new opportunities, to contact recruiters, and to get responses from other people in your network. We've gotten some questions on groups and whether or not you should join groups for certain areas or certain topics, whether you should add them to your profile, whether you should participate in them, and, for example, answer people's questions. I would say if you have the time, yes, you can do this, but you don't want to spend hours a day participating in groups. If you have 10 or 15 minutes of free time in between tasks or when you're in transit or something like that, sure, you can go on and answer a few questions and participate, but don't get distracted from actual networking. Doing this online and creating an online presence helps a lot, but Really, networking is about contacting people in person, talking with them on the phone, and making the connection real life as quickly as possible. So yes, do it if you can, but don't spend hours and hours doing this and go down the rabbit hole of interacting only online with people. So that's really all we have to say on step 4, adding connections and joining groups. That really takes us to the end of the lesson. So let's do a recap and summary of what makes LinkedIn so important and how to set up your profile. In short, the way I think about LinkedIn is that it requires several hours at most to set up, and then maybe 30 minutes per year of maintenance. Now, in exchange for that time, you get something that is relatively easy to implement, but which also makes a high impact. And so we would classify it as a major opportunity to step up your networking and recruiting efforts and get much better results. If you want to quantify this, for a few hours of work, you get substantially better response rates when networking and a wider network. Let's say that by doing this, your response rate goes up by 5%. Well, if you send out 500 emails or messages in a given year because you're looking for an internship or a job, that equates to about 25 extra emails in that year. Now, 25 extra emails when you're looking at hundreds of messages you're sending out may not sound like a lot, but keep in mind, any one of those could lead to a job offer. It's not as if each one of those has a specific dollar value or anything like that, but any one of those emails you actually get back in response could lead to a job offer. So think about how much entry-level jobs in this industry pay, and then ask yourself, how much is that worth to you? Getting those 25 extra responses for spending only a few hours of work setting this up, if not even less time than that. And that's why we recommend using LinkedIn and why we are big fans of the site and the service. To set up your profile, you have to clean up your existing social media presence first, hide your Facebook profile from search engines, restrict what people can see, make sure your other accounts are anonymous or well hidden, or that you don't post anything controversial. Get a really good headshot for your new LinkedIn profile. You should be looking at the camera wearing business professional attire. It should only show the top part of your body or just your head, and you should be against a solid background. Also, make sure you have the latest version of your resume and update it if necessary. Then update your profile. Add your photo, create a headline, make your URL customized and use your first name and last name, have a good summary, enter a shortened version of your work experience, and then enter other information and get recommendations and endorsements if you can. And then you can start adding connections, ideally get up to at least 10 before you start contacting people, and then 100 and 500 plus in the long term, and then join groups if you want and start participating like that. So that's it for our first tutorial on how to set up your LinkedIn profile. Coming up next, we're going to go over how to find people and contact them over LinkedIn, and then how to send messages, follow up, and then use the built-in LinkedIn messaging system successfully to win interviews and ultimately offers.